Hi, I'm Greg Pollock. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about Vuex modules, specifically how we can organize our Vuex code using Vuex modules, and then we'll look at how to namespace our modules to keep things even more encapsulated. Let's reorganize our code using modules, and we'll start by looking at why we might need them. Up until now, all our Vuex code has been going inside store.js, all of our state, mutations, actions, and getters, all in one file. And as our application grows, this will obviously get messier. We can solve this problem by splitting out our code into separate modules. We'll have a user module and event module. They can each have their own state, mutations, actions, and getters. We'll place them inside a modules directory, and we'll tell our store.js file where to find them. You can create modules for data models like we have here for user and event. We can also create modules for features, including any functionality which uses shared state or data. A good example here is we could have a single module for doing user authentication and encapsulate all authentication code in a single module. Our first step for using modules is to create a store directory. We'll create a new folder inside of our source directory called store. Then we'll drag our store.js inside this directory. We then need to tell our main.js file where to find this store, inside a store directory. If we take a look inside our browser, we can see that everything is working just fine. In a minute, we're going to be putting our user state inside of a module. But first, let's use the state inside event list. Here in map state, I'll include user. And now, in the title, I'm going to say events for user.name, printing out that state. If I look in the browser, sure enough, it says events for Atom jar. Now let's create our user Vuex module. We'll start by cutting the user's state from the store.js. And now we'll create a new folder for our modules called modules. Inside of that directory, we'll create a new file. We'll call it user.js. We're going to always be using this icon when we're talking about Vuex modules. Inside of this file, I will paste in the user's state. I'm also going to delete Adam's last name just so the title appears on one line. Notice I'm exporting the state as a constant here. Next, I need to import this Vuex module into my store.js. I'll say import star as user from store/module/user. What the star is doing is importing all public items into the user namespace. So if I looked at the value of user.state, it would equal the value of the constant that I exported. Now I need to tell Vuex to use this module like this. Now inside of event list, I need to change how I'm printing out the name by adding an extra .user. See, this first value is the module name, and the second is the state inside the module. Now if I look into the browser, I can see events for Atom. Everything's working. Before we create a module for events, there's one more thing I need to change. Inside of event create, we access the user state. I just need to add a .user to that to reference the module name. Now let's move our event Vuex code into a Vuex module. First, we'll create a new file inside of our modules directory called event.js. Inside our store.js, first, we're going to cut out event service and move it to our new event module because it's our event actions that call it. Then inside our store.js, we're going to copy all of the code because it's all for the event, except for the categories at the top. We'll delete everything but those categories. Now inside event.js, we'll paste that in. And we need to make some modifications to the code. We'll call export const state to expose the state constant. We'll delete categories from our state. we'll export the mutations constant. We'll export the actions constant. And lastly, we'll export the getters constant. Next, we need to import this module into our store.js. I'll copy and paste our import line. And add that to our list of Vuex modules. Now if I look in the browser, it's not quite working yet. We need to make some changes to our components. I'm going to jump into our event list, and if I scroll to the bottom of this file, I can see that I need to change the map state. When I call store.state.event, event is referring to the module name, and inside of that is the events and events total state. So I need to change map state to reference the module name. Then to access events total, I need to type .event. Then at the top of event list.view, when I access the array of events, I need to change that to event.events. And inside the browser, I can now see the list working. Now inside event show, I need to make some changes here too. Look at all the different places we're using event. Luckily, I don't have to change them all to event.event. There's another way to make it work. I'm going to change map state from using an array to using an object, and then specify that I want event to be mapped to state.event.event. That's all I need to do, and if I jump in the browser, I can see that show event is working fine. I've been showing you one module syntax for Vuex, but there's two you'll see often in the wild. The first one, which we've been using, uses constants. So inside our modules, we have state, mutations, actions, and getters. Then inside of our store.js, we use import star. The benefit of this syntax is that it makes it easier to create private variables and methods. The other syntax you'll often see is just exporting a single object with our state, mutations, actions, and getters. And then here's how we import that. Both syntaxes are fine. It's just a matter of preference. It's common to access one module state from another module, but how do we do that? Here you can see our create event action. What if we wanted to access the user module state from inside this action? So we're inside the event module, and inside that action, we want to access the user module state. Given the syntax we already know, we might try to solve it by sending in the state from the context object, and then accessing the state by doing state.user.user.name. However, that's not going to work. When we're in modules, the state context object only gives us access to the state inside of our module, the local state. Instead, we need to send in the root state. That gives us access to the base state inside our store.js. Then we can call root state.user.user.name. This root state comes from our store.js, and from there we can access the user module, fetch the user state, and then get access to the name. Remember how we left the categories in our store.js? If we needed access to those, we would find them on the root state. It's also common to call another module's actions from inside your action. How might we do that? Specifically, how do we dispatch the user module's actions from inside an event action? We can do that a lot like we would inside of a component. We'll add dispatch from the context object, and then we'll dispatch the action we want to call. This works fine, and that's because our actions are on the global namespace. See, actions, mutations, and getters are always registered under the global namespace, also known as the root, which is $store, even when using modules. What this means is, no matter where they're declared, they're called without their module name. So you'll notice when I'm dispatching some action or I'm accessing a getter, I'm not mentioning the module name. I don't have to. The reason why Vuex is implemented like this is because I might want to have multiple actions or mutations using the same name. An example here might be a logger module. If I wanted to log out every time a user makes a purchase. So I could create a purchase action inside my logger module so that when a purchase gets called, it calls the real purchase action, and it also calls the logger purchase action. The drawback of this, as you might imagine, is I can end up with naming collisions. This is why with Vuex you can do module namespacing. Let's implement this in our example app. I'm going to jump into our event module, and I'll set namespace to equal to true. This ensures that all mutations, actions, and getters will now be namespaced under event. Now we need to change our actions to use this namespace. Inside event create, we'll add event / to create event action. Inside event list, we'll add event / to our fetch events action. And inside event show, we'll add event / to our fetch event action. Now inside our browser, we can see that inside of our list and inside our show, everything is working. But now we're namespaced. I want to show you how we can use the map actions helper. So what I can do here is inside created, I can call the fetch event function. Now I need to use the map actions helper to make that possible. So inside methods, I'll set map actions to fetch event. Now that's what I would do if I wasn't namespaced. Because I'm namespaced, I need to use event /. And there's another syntax I can use here. I can send event as the first parameter and then send in an array. The first argument's a namespace. The second are the actions to map. This way I can have a bunch in that array. On line 33 here, I can still call this.fetchEvent. If I take a look in the browser and go to a show page, everything's working fine. I also want to show you how to access namespaced getters. Without namespacing to access a getter, here is what I would do. We covered this in a previous lesson. Using the map getters helper, I can use this syntax and it gives me the same functionality. With a namespace module, here's how I would call a getter. And with map getters, I would use this syntax. Remember this code from earlier, the create event action? Well, does any of this change with namespace modules? Let's take a look. Does the way we access the state change? No, nothing changes here. It still works fine. What about when we call an action? Well, this doesn't change as long as the action is inside this module. What about calling mutations? Again, this doesn't change as long as the mutation is inside this module. And frankly, mutation should not be called from other Vuex modules. This is a best practice. Mutation should only be called from actions inside the current module. So I'm not going to show you how to call another module's mutations. You shouldn't be doing that. But what if the action is inside another namespace module? How would I call it? I would call module name / action to call. The second parameter would be null. That's the payload. If the payload had a value, we would send it in there. If we don't, we simply send in null. And then we send in root true. That tells dispatch to look for this action at the root of our store. So basically, inside create event, it's going up to the root of our store, looking inside module name, which then has the action named action to call. I know, that was a lot. Is your brain full? In this lesson, we learned about organizing our Vuex code into modules, and then how to namespace our modules to keep things more isolated and scale our Vuex code. Thanks for watching. It's like we have here with user and event. Are you done hammering? Oh, here's the parents. Hi. See, this first value is the module name, and the second is a hammer. Stop hammering. They're gonna need an ambulance for the guys next door if they don't cut it out. We'll access dispatch from our